welcome into another Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith, and you once again did not hear Brandon Rossi's voice, which means no Alan Saunders again today. He's still sick. Shout out to Alan. Hope that things get better for. I was just dealing with illness that I assume is similar, just talking to him. So shout out to Alan. I hope that he gets better in the very near future. But no DB. We got Aaron Becker joining the show, also of Steelers Now. Aaron, what's going on, pal?
It's good, man. Speculation season, right? We're right in the midst of it. So it's been fun. It seems there's kind of some news every day here, but got to determine if it's real or not, right?
Yeah. If you are somebody that is not just an afternoon drive watcher, listener, you're familiar with Aaron. Obviously, I said he's with the site as well, the Steelers Spotlight. Lots of great stuff coming out of Aaron Becker. So be sure to check out Aaron's work as well on the site or here on the YouTube channel. But Aaron, that's a good segue that you actually gave me there to dive into some stuff that we can sift through as we go through the offseason here. Maybe the first free agency domino to fall happening before we even get to free agency. T. Higgins going to be tagged by the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I don't know that enough people just like assume that this was going to happen. It seems very likely that this would be the case, just because even if they can't reach an agreement on a number, one, they could always trade him, certainly on a tag and trade. But also, if they had to play this year, assuming that T would, just like he did last year, $26 million for the production that he gives with the way that we're seeing that wide receiver 2 number jump up, it seems reasonable, even if, like, worst case scenario, he had to play on that tag.
Yeah, there's a few layers to this, right? I think the number one thing is the Bengals were never going to let T. Higgins go anywhere else in the AFC North. So them tagging him pretty much guarantees he's not going to be a Steeler. He's not going to be a Raven. He's not going to be a Brown. Joe Burrow has been very outspoken about, paying all these upcoming free agents for the Bengals, right? They have to pay Jamar Chase. He's going to probably reset the receiver market, right? I mean, they have Trey Hendrickson, who just led the league in sacks, and T. Higgins, who's been an incredible number 2 receiver there for them, and probably could be a number 1 for a lot of other teams around the league. Now, like you said, just because they tagged him doesn't necessarily mean he's going to stay a Bengal. They could still tag and trade him. But I think it pretty much puts to bed that T. Higgins will unfortunately not be a Steeler. I, for one, never really thought it was a realistic option. But for those still holding on to their hopes for that one, time to move on, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I thought it would be fun if you actually got to free agency to let the speculation begin. Just because, like, from conversations I'd have from people that are close to the organization, I'm sure you have as well. Like, the organization definitely big fans of T. Higgins, and if he were to hit the open market, they certainly would have been interested in trying to lure him. But clearly, that discussion can be put to rest. There's, I guess that dwindles it by 3 teams. Certainly, everybody else, if they are going to be open to a trade, would be trying to trade for him. And then I guess you can also look at it like, okay, maybe the likelihood of even within the AFC, not as much as the AFC North specifically, but if they had the preference, they would trade him to the NFC as opposed to the AFC. So it just keeps, like you said, multi-layered here, but certainly not going to be in Pittsburgh in 2025.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, head coach Mike Tomlin, like you said, I think a lot of people were hoping he would hit that open market. Tomlin said numerous times this in 2024 that calling Higgins a goon and talking about that matchup against Joey Porter Jr. And I think a lot of people were kind of envisioning that in Latrobe this coming summer, right? Seeing those two line up against each other. But unfortunately, the tag kind of puts that to bed. And now the Steelers kind of have to turn their attention to the other guys, the Chris Godwins, the Darius Slaytons, who are free agents, and then even the guys like who are trade candidates, cut candidates, whatever you want to determine them to be right now, the Deebo Samuels, the Cooper Kupps, even the Christian Kirks. I know he's been recently labeled as a guy to potentially watch for the Steelers this offseason. Steelers nearly traded for him at the trade deadline this past season, but he broke his collarbone. That injury, I think, usually takes about 8 to 12 weeks. I wrote a little story on that today. You can check it out at Steelers.com, SteelersNow.com. But, that's a guy that I think is really interesting. He's still only 28. He hasn't had the production he had in 2022 when he had his 1,000-yard receiving season, but he's certainly an intriguing option that could come in and complement George Pickens or someone else. I mean, the Steelers have to add 2 guys in that room this offseason. And that's if you bring back George Pickens. If you're trading George Pickens, that I know a lot of people are kind of speculating right now as well, you got to add a 3rd guy. So I think the Steelers are going to target this receiver room in free agency, maybe trade 2025 NFL draft. It should be fun.
Absolutely. And I think that there's so much intrigue within that room just because did they learn their lesson from this past season in terms of the way that they handled the wide receiver room? I would like to think yes. I think that they looked at that as being like the one big misstep that they made amongst, several others, but like just the handling of that. And I keep going back to this, but like I don't think that trading Deontay Johnson was the reason that this went the way that it did necessarily, but then like not replacing him at all. Like you had the entirety of free agency put all their eggs in the Brandon Ayuk basket. That obviously did not come to fruition. And then eventually what they ended up settling for was on trade deadline day, a 5th-round pick for Mike Williams was the answer to the wide receiver room. So really badly mismanaged that one room last year, and I'm hopeful that they learned their lesson. Now, you mentioned George Pickens in there, which I think is a great segue to a question that we got from Nicholas Serentow here. He said, what do you think about a straight up George Pickens for Garrett Wilson trade? And of course, would they take a receiver in the draft within that? Is that even a possibility? I think, people have mentioned the name Garrett Wilson, and it would certainly be even more intriguing if Justin Fields is the quarterback that is back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the time at Ohio State that they had together. People are always looking for a way to reunite a college player with their college quarterback. We see that obviously. But I think when you look at this one, I have a hard time understanding that from the Jets' perspective, unless like it's really like, hey, disgruntled guy who's looking for a contract, team they're currently on don't want to pay them. Maybe the other team does. I don't know, but I have a hard time seeing this 1-for-1 swap making a ton of sense for the Jets, just because I don't think that's a position that Garrett Wilson is in. Now, if Aaron Rodgers would have been coming back and they still were going to have Devontae Adams on the roster and still were going to have Alan Lazard on the roster and like so much money committed to the wide receiver room other than Garrett Wilson, then like maybe, but then I still don't see a way that they paid George Pickens. So like I see a path to both of these guys being traded from the current rosters. I don't know that it would make sense for the Jets to do this 1-for-1 swap. The Steelers' perspective, though, is I do, because I don't think that like the one thing I don't think is likely this summer in regards to George Pickens is he gets a contract extension. Now, what path does that take us down from there? Do the Steelers get ahead of, assuming that George will be upset about that, and trade him, or do they try to see if they can use him as their own rental, if you will, for 2025? And if that's the case, will George play out the year, request a trade? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. First with the trade 1-for-1 with Garrett Wilson, I agree with you. With the 1-for-1, when I look at trades, I kind of look at both sides of it. Right, for the Steelers side, I think I would absolutely run that call right now and let's do it. Right. But from the Jets perspective, I don't love it. I almost think I would want Pickens and a pick in return. But like you said, both of these guys are going to get paid here soon. They're both from the 2022 NFL draft.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like one guy has a couple more years under the rookie deal and, one team has the ability to pay one and the other doesn't. So if you're
in the case of Garrett, you have the 5th-year option because of first round pick, but yeah, either way, both extension eligible this summer. Yeah.
Right. And so from the Jets perspective, I agree, Aaron Rodgers, not coming back. I think that, kind of also goes in play with Devontae Adams. He's probably going to follow Rodgers out the door. And so then if you trade Garrett Wilson, the receiver room gets a little wonky at that point. And so I think they kind of want to hold on to that guy. And he's been, really a great player for them so far. Now, with the George Pickens aspect of everything, I think the Steelers are playing their cards really, really close to their chest with this one. Anytime they've kind of spoken about Pickens, obviously they've been very critical of kind of the headaches he's created over the last few years. But, them putting all their eggs in one basket last offseason with not Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk. I don't think they want that to happen again. So I think if they have the ability to trade Pickens this offseason, they might. But if another scenario plays out like last offseason, the Steelers keep kind of striking out on these receivers, I think it's very realistic that the Steelers hold on to Pickens. Now, could he kind of sit out if he wants to get paid and the Steelers aren't willing to do that? Yeah. But, that's kind of a decision you're going to have to make later down the road. Maybe he's a trade deadline target next season, right? You see what you have with him then, and then see if there's a team looking to compete then that you kind of deal him to then.
I understand that thinking for sure. I guess my concern with that, or in the desire to get out in front of it, is I would want to have the capital ahead of the 25 draft to replace him, as opposed to to not knowing, then going into the summer, he creates this headache and you end up moving on from him. And yeah, sure, you get a pick in 26, but that's certainly not going to help you right now. And you had this disgruntled player on your roster who really wasn't providing anything for you. So I don't know. I guess my line of thinking, again, I go down two separate trains of thought here, but either way, if George Pickens does not get paid, which I don't think is going to happen this summer, I ultimately just think it's going to get ugly one way or the other. Like, that's just my line of thinking with it. The other thing that this kind of goes into where he said about the draft, and I think this can lead us into another question from Zach Frost here, by the way, great first name. He said, what's the most likely position that we could see the Steelers double dip in? I think receivers, obviously, up there. Like, even the idea that George Pickens is going to be on the roster, they could sign a free agent and draft one. I think that's certainly likely. If George Pickens is traded, you could talk me into them like acquiring 3 wide receivers that weren't on the roster this summer. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I agree. They have to add 2 receivers to this room no matter what this offseason, whether that's through free agency or the draft. You trade Pickens, you add a 3rd guy. That's different there. So that's certainly a position that you could double dip at receiver in the draft. Now, this year's draft is a little bit top heavy at receiver, right? You kind of have the top, 4 guys. You have McMillan out of Arizona, Mika Buka, Luther Burden, Golden out of Texas. After them, it's a little bit hit or miss. I mean, they're interesting guys, with Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris. But I think I would almost guarantee right now that the Steelers are going to double dip at defensive line in this draft. It's just too deep. I think you can find starters all the way down through round 4. And I think the Steelers, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that they're going to continue to follow that Eagles blueprint with Andy Weidel. He learned from Howie Roseman. The Steelers revamped their offensive line over the last few seasons, and now I think they're just going to flip it to the defensive side of the ball and work on those trenches there. There's guys day 2 and 3 like Derek Harmon, Deion Walker, Jordan Phillips. I mean, those are all guys that could be day 1 starters for the Steelers, and you could even find your Cam Hayward replacement with a guy like Kenneth Grant in the 1st round. I really like him. A big fan of him out of Michigan. So defensive line is going to be heavily looked at, I think, in this draft by multiple teams, and the Steelers will definitely be one of them.
I wasn't a big fan of Kenneth Grant in college, which is why I'm such a big fan of him as an NFL prospect, OH. But yeah, I would certainly love him to be in a Pittsburgh uniform, get him out of that college uniform, and I'll become a much bigger fan of his game. No, but he's torn it up. I think he kind of got forgotten about, obviously playing next to Mason Graham. That's the guy we talks about, probably going to go in the top 5.
Right.
So, he just plays a different role. So, but I think certainly fits the bill of what the Steelers are looking for. So if you're talking about double dip in specifically the draft, 100% agree. If we're looking at the offseason in totality, I think wide receiver, you mentioned defensive line, I'll throw that in there as well. What about corner? We don't know what's going on with Dante Jackson, obviously opposite of Joey Porter Jr. That's a spot that I think that we would look at as well, and not necessarily say double dip in just free agency or double dip just in the draft, but maybe 1-1. I think that's certainly possible. I've had some names thrown my way at corner. Asante Samuel Jr., I know, has a ton of fans in the organization. Obviously, a 4-year guy already in the NFL, but he's only 25 years old. We know that they love that. Those like younger veteran players, it would kind of be going like the cornerback version of them adding Patrick Queen last offseason. When you look at it from that perspective, he's only played like 80 snaps, I think, in the slot so far in his NFL career, but he's a guy that can do it, excelled in man coverage. Again, not knowing what the future of Dante Jackson holds. What's your thoughts on the cornerback room beyond Joey Porter Jr.?
Yeah, I agree. I could definitely see them double dipping at that position this offseason, right? You kind of need I liked what Dante Jackson brought to the room, but I think you can still improve at that position. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of went out and got a guy like DJ Reed to play across Joey Porter, right? And then maybe find that slot guy also, maybe a more veteran guy in free agency, or you look to the draft to add that, slot corner there. I like Asante Samuel as well. I think he can play inside and outside. And so he kind of gives you the flexibility to kind of tag team that with Joey Porter Jr. And then if you need to bring in a 3rd corner, you kind of put in Corey Trice or maybe you get another bigger corner in the draft. So, yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Corner is definitely another position that the Steelers could double dip this offseason along with receiver and defensive line.
You mentioned, obviously, I brought up Dante Jackson. You gave your thoughts on him and the contributions that he had. Obviously, everybody falls in love with the ball production, the 5 picks that he had.
Yeah.
I think it's a weird fit. Like, that's why I was like so surprised when I saw there was mutual interest in bringing him back, just because, they want to play a lot of, like, they want their corners to be bigger and be able to press. We saw that by the way that they were kind of targeting their guys. Joey Porter Jr., obviously Corey Trice, they were intrigued enough to bring Darius Rush in and get a look at him. It seems like that's just like the prototype that they're looking for at this point. And then Dante Jackson goes against all of that. Obviously, a smaller guy, zone specific corner. So, like, just kind of like a weird fit to me from that scheme standpoint. And you saw the way that he was getting burned down the stretch, in my opinion. So, I appreciate the contributions. Not somebody that I think that I'm like chomping at the bit to bring back into the room. And then people are like, yeah, you could bring, still maybe double dip, but bring him back for depth purposes. I think my issue with that, and maybe my heart for this guy is just too big. I'm just not trying to bury Corey Trice entirely. I think that he's a good
Yeah.
NFL player if he can stay healthy. And the role that you kind of defined for him is exactly what I envisioned. Like, if you get Asante Samuel Jr. to play outside in 2 receiver looks, but be able to kick inside in 3 receiver looks, and then you give Corey Trice that job on the boundary. That's kind of the way that I've envisioned it. What's your thoughts on just the idea of, like, would you be interested in continuing forward with Dante Jackson if you're the Steelers?
I think it kind of depends about the price point, right? If if he comes back for the right price and he kind of wants to play that depth guy who can be the starter if he needs to be, great. I think I just saw on Spot Rack that he's kind of projected a 2-year 25, so 12.5 million a year. That seems a little bit steep for me. If that turns out to be the price point for him, I would
Mhm.
personally pass on that. I know the Steelers have more cap space than they have had in previous years, but I don't want to see them kind of burn it at that position, if you will, or if you do, maybe go get a bit higher tier guy like a DJ Reed or something like that. So I liked what he did. Right, the ball production, the 5 picks, career high for him. I think you can get caught up in that sometimes. Sometimes it's right place, right time.
Sure.
And so if he comes back, if he wants to come back on 5, 6, maybe 7 mil, I would consider it. But if it is that 12.5 mil per year price point, I think I'd personally pass on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. This is interesting from Kenny Trill. If the draft was tomorrow, what is the best guess as to the Steelers' first round selection? Kenny, why I hate this question is because, like, free agency usually points us in that direction. So,
Yeah.
like, thank goodness the draft isn't tomorrow because we haven't signed anybody in free agency and there's still a lot of holes. Some of those boxes will be checked prior to when we get to the draft. Obviously, kind of the way the Steelers have always gone about business is whether it is just like, maybe not the highest tier player, but a replacement level player, whatever it might be. In terms of needs, they're going to check pretty much every box so they at least have a placeholder in that spot before we get to the draft, where it's like, we don't have to draft this
Yeah.
position. You can take the best player available. However, with that in mind, and just in my head going through the way that free agency is going to take place, until I'm forced to change my answer on this, I'm going to Mecca Ibuka at pick 21 for the Steelers.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of mock drafts would agree with you right now. I, I'll answer this question in kind of 2 parts. If you're taking the roster as is right now,
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to go Ibuka, right? I mean, the Steelers just clearly have a void at receiver. Um, Now, if we're looking post free agency and what I foresee happening, I'm going to go defensive line and I'm going to go that Kenneth Grant pick.
Okay.
Because I expect the Steelers to move on from Larry Ogunjobi. I see him
Mm-hmm.
as being and they can save, I believe it's $7 million by moving on from him. So you're not only looking for Cameron Hayward's replacement, but you're also looking to bump Keanu Benton back in. You need that nose tackle. And so I think it's going to be defensive line right now. Like I said, I think the Steelers are following this Eagles blueprint. You saw them go and get Jordan Davis. You saw them go and get Jalen Carter. And you look at what they did to Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs offense in the Super Bowl. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the
Yeah.
Steelers are licking their chops at having a unit just like that, right? I think if the Steelers go out and get a receiver in free agency or trade for one, I think it very likens the possibility of the Steelers going defensive line in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong, have no qualms if Kenneth Grant is the first round pick, and I think the Eagles thing is certainly interesting. Obviously, the execution has not been to the same level as the Eagles have gone about it. But think about it, like Howie Roseman's been the GM there for like 15 years. Like it's not like
Yeah.
overnight this happened.
Yeah.
The way that they've built this thing, it's very impressive to look at it now. And now it's just like a factory. If they lose a player, they have somebody else ready to step in. A la Jason Kelsey retires, Cam Jurgens right there to take his job. But even on the defensive side, the way that they turn over positions there. So the execution, very different, similar mindset in terms of what the Steelers want to be. We'll see if they can get there, obviously. This is interesting going to the quarterback position because right now, Skylar Thompson, only quarterback on the roster. Aaron, Berg Sports Fan asks, what would you consider the best case scenario at quarterback for the Steelers this year? And not just in 2025. He wants both in 2025 and also long term.
That's tough. I mean, I think one of the better options kind of just went in and out the door pretty quickly in Trevor Lawrence, right? Steelers reportedly inquiring about him. I didn't think it was ever realistic. He has a no trade clause. But if there was any truth to that whatsoever, I mean, he's 25 years old. I know he's coming off a bit of a down year, but I mean, a number one overall pick quarterback like him, I mean, he's showcased why he was that so far in his career. And I think the Steelers trading for him would have been great for them. But that is not happening. He went on Kay Adams' podcast today, said he's happy in Jacksonville. He's not coming to Pittsburgh. And so, you know, to answer the question, I guess it depends what you view the Steelers team to be in 2025. If you think they can win now, I think Matthew Stafford is really, really interesting. I think with this situation, it's not like Trevor Lawrence. I think where there is smoke, there is fire, and there's a lot of NFL insiders saying that there is truth to some of this. I think at the end of the day, I think the Rams and Matthew Stafford would love to stay together. But depending what number he wants to be paid this coming year, I think that's a possibility of them moving on from him. And I think the Steelers, if you think you can win now and you can add a couple pieces this offseason to, I guess, run it back. I mean, the Steelers seem willing to do that with Arthur Smith and Tara Austin as their coordinators. He's a guy that's really interesting. Obviously, I don't want to overpay for him. I saw, you know, some people saying first and second round pick or something like that. You know, for a guy of his age, I mean, he played well and he almost got them to the NFC Championship game where I think they would have probably been favored at home against the rookie quarterback Jane Daniels-led Commanders. So there's interest there for sure, but I don't want to overpay for him if that doesn't happen. And in general, if you just don't think the Steelers are ready to go compete for a Super Bowl right away here in 2025, if you're looking to hit the quarterback lottery, I think it makes a lot of sense to just kind of run it back with Justin Fields, right? He's 25 years old. He went 4-2 as your starter. Some people could say they've seen enough from him. Others would disagree. I'm kind of in the middle there, right? I'd like the Steelers to add a couple more playmakers, right? The Steelers receiver room this past season wasn't fantastic, and I want to see kind of what Fields would look like with more talent around him, kind of what he really lacked in Chicago.
I think it is Matthew Stafford in terms of if you're trying to juice as much as you can out of this current window, whatever you want to consider this right now. And I get I certainly get the idea that people wouldn't want to do that because they don't think that this team is a competitor right now and they don't want to give up those assets. The only thing that, like, playing devil's advocate, I think you got to look at it from the players on the team perspective too, and how it has to be sold to them. They would certainly be on board with that addition. And when you have Cam Hayward, when you have TJ Watt, who has not won a playoff game yet, when you have Minkah Fitzpatrick in the defense that the Steelers do, I think that would be an easy move to sell for 2025, bringing in Matthew Stafford. On the other side of that, what I don't think would be an easy move to sell, but the way that I'll spin this as being a good scenario is because of what you could do with the rest of the roster. And we just saw it with Russell Wilson being able to fall into their laps on the vet men. Kirk Cousins, if he gets cut, could come in here on the vet men and would allow you to spend everywhere else besides the quarterback position with all this money that they have and be able to drop the next guy into the best possible scenario. We had JP Acosta on here, and he was talking about this last week, because of the whole Trevor Lawrence thing you just brought up. And he was talking about how the Steelers kind of just need to QB proof their offense, to be able to drop in whatever quarterback. That's basically what they're trying to do right now. And I think that would allow them. Now, they had the opportunity to do it last year. We're like second to last in terms of their cash spending on the offensive side of the ball. So you got to commit to this idea if this is the path that you're going down. And certainly I'm not expecting Kirk Cousins to come in here, especially behind this offensive line, and light it up. But it's more so about what he would allow them to do spending wise for the rest of the offense for the next guy. Is there anybody in the draft that intrigues you like at all? Because the conversations that we've had on here regarding the quarterback position have not been good. Like, I'll just be frank. Alan and I have just totally crapped on the quarterback class every opportunity. We brought JP on here. He did the same. So, like, if any of these guys have listened, gotten wind of the clip, we're sorry. If their families have gotten wind of the clips, we're sorry. But where are you at with this class?
I think I'm a pretty hard pass on this class. Yeah, I just think this class, what is deep in this class, is kind of fits what the Steelers need. You can grab a receiver, you can double dip at defensive line, you can add a running back to replace Najee Harris. I mean, maybe there's a guy on day 3, maybe Tyler Shook. I'm okay with him kind of being backup third quarterback for the Steelers this season. But I'm not investing high draft capital at all in a quarterback in this class. I hope the Steelers learned their lesson from the Kenny Pickett draft selection a few years ago. But personally, I'm looking to either reunite with Justin Fields here, or maybe go find a veteran, kind of like we talked about with Stafford, or a guy you can get at the cheap, like a Kirk Cousins, and see what you can round out the rest of the roster with this offseason.
Yeah, I think Fields is still the most likely for me. And I think, like, just in terms of, like, it's a logical path to take. I think that they can sell that too, because of the way that the first 6 games look. And that's like something I keep going back to. Should they have to sell it to the fan base, to the team? Like, it's ultimately their call, obviously. But, like, I think that that's a move people in general could get behind for a year. Understanding that, like, I don't think anybody would view it. They would want him back in a multi-year deal. I would expect he'll be under contract for 2026 as well, because he's got to have somebody as like a placeholder. But I think that most people would just expect he's the starter for 2025, unless things go crazy in a positive direction for Justin, assuming that dart throw, the next big dart throw, comes in 26 at that spot. So, one more before we get out of here, Aaron. This comes from Tevin Carter, my guy. DM me this on Twitter, actually. And this probably should have been last week that we got to this, but we had like a crazy day on Friday where I wasn't able to. So he says, what are the chances that part of Grady Brown's job description as duties of the defense, or as DC, were defensive pass game coordinator, and the problem wasn't so much the defense but the communication aspect? Similar scenario with Curry and coordinating in the front 7 with the linebackers. Still think it speaks more so to why you don't want too much responsibility on one person's plate, and they need to add some coaches, but that's how they determine it and want to run things, so it kind of makes the move a little bit easier to grasp. I think this is certainly interesting, Aaron, because Alan and I have, basically since this podcast started, been talking about not being on the same page, and Art Rooney II even came out and said this himself, in terms of the Steelers feeling like they don't need more coaches. I think that is a massive red flag and misstep by the organization to not have more coaches. I think there's certainly questions in some spots about the quality of coaches too. Alan and I have some disagreements in terms of the quality of the coaches at spots, but more so the quantity. Like, Brian Flores walking out the door for the position that he got, I don't think was the big mistake. The big mistake was not replacing him when he left. I think not having anybody on staff right now that has any proven track record in terms of developing a quarterback is a massive misstep right now. So I don't know for sure that this was the case with Grady Brown and Aaron Curry specifically, but I do think it speaks to the larger picture issues that I've had in terms of this organization feeling like they can put so much on coaches' plates. And then you look at like Chuck Smith in Baltimore, where his only job is working as a pass rush specialist with guys. Like, there should be specific coaches on the staff that are not here, and maybe they are asking their coaches to do way more than they should be or are qualified to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to discount that the Steelers aren't going to add to their coaching right now. I mean, I think a guy like Antonio Pierce would make a ton of sense for the Steelers coaching staff. But like you said, I mean, when we spoke to Art Rooney at the end of the season, he seemed pretty content with the size, if you will, of his
Yeah.
coaching
Yep.
roster. I don't expect any major changes. If you're looking for a silver lining of moving on from a guy like Grady Brown, who was, kind of getting defensive coordinator looks,
Mm-hmm.
who they kind of replaced him with, Jared Alexander. He was the assistant Steelers DBs coach from 2022 to 2023. And a player who's kind of been lacking in the turnover realm, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. He had his career high 6 interceptions with Alexander on the coaching staff in 2022. Obviously, there's stretching there a little bit, but sometimes you just kind of need a fresh start. And I mean, I think we saw that with the Texans and Bobby Slowick. And not
Yeah.
necessarily is he a bad coach by any means, and he was picked up pretty quickly. But it just might be that case for that move specifically. But in general, like we were talking with the size of the Steelers coaching staff, Art Rooney seems pretty content with it. I'm more on the side of you that I think adding a more veteran coach, a former head coach like Antonio Pierce would make a ton of sense. Just as of right now, I'm not sure that happens, unfortunately. So
Yeah, and I love the Pierce shout specifically, just because when you look at Tomlin and now, Gerald bringing brought back, or if it was Grady before that, that experience more so with the DBs, and like, where's the front seven of that? That's what Flores brought. Somebody that has the
yeah,
front seven experience, knows how to mix it up front and give you exotic looks. And obviously Pierce being a former linebacker, that being the position he played, I think would certainly be able to do that. That would be his area of expertise. So whether it's Pierce or somebody of that vein, I think a senior defensive assistant with front seven background is like very high on my offseason wish list for the Steelers.
yeah,
And I, regardless of who's brought back or brought in to play quarterback this year, my concern is whether that dart throw comes in 26 or 27 or whenever it is in the near future at the position. Who on the staff right now are you looking at and saying, yeah, there's a guy that I trust to work with this quarterback? Because Tom Arth, the quarterback's coach, I know that that's where people are going to look to first and foremost. He worked with Justin Herbert for 2 years, but it was his third and fourth years in the NFL. It's not like Pep Hamilton was his first QB coach that he had. And obviously he was a fifth overall pick. Like, is there anybody on the staff right now that you look at and say, yeah, this is the guy I'm entrusting with developing that quarterback?
I mean, honestly, probably not. I mean, Arthur Smith was kind of brought in to the Steelers organization because of his track record of winning without that elite quarterback, right? And
Yeah.
so, he's kind of wanted to build kind of what he had in Tennessee, the Derrick Henry, AJ Brown, Corey Davis kind of setup. But developing a young quarterback, I don't have a ton of optimism right now about it. Like we said, could they still add it this offseason? Maybe. Could they add one next offseason when I expect them to kind of make that big jump at a quarterback in next year's draft? Potentially. But currently, right now, I mean, this coaching staff is kind of built to win without that elite quarterback because that's just the roster that they have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good stuff, Aaron. Appreciate you jumping on here with me, filling in for Alan. Don't know when we're going to get out. Hopefully tomorrow. Prayers up for Alan Saunders. We need him back
Yeah.
in the fold. Nothing against Aaron, nothing against DB, but I need that Brandon Ross eye intro bringing us in with that voiceover. So, Aaron, good stuff. Appreciate you. Tell people they can find you.
You can find all my work at SteelersNow.com, and you can follow me at Aaron_M_Becker on Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. So
there we go. Appreciate it. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you are here on YouTube. Again, shout out to everybody that got us across that 15,000 subscriber mark, just to give you an update. And I always try to throw in like a random Steeler in here with a number. So we're at 15,000 and Valentino Blake subscribers right now. Not Antoine Blake, Valentino Blake subscribers. The real ones know. So appreciate each and every one of you. Keep the questions coming. Obviously, we're going to need those to keep coming throughout the off season to provide you guys content. We love being part of the conversation with you guys getting involved. So be sure to do that. If you are listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, search Steelers Afternoon Drive over there. Leave us a 5-star review for sure. And then you'll follow me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. Again, shout out to Aaron Becker for coming on. Appreciate you. We'll be back in the fold, whether it's me and myself and I or whoever's going to be here tomorrow. So be sure to do that. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.